Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. My name is Ron Rogers with AHEAD. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Vijay Venkatesan, Chief Data Officer at Horizon Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Welcome, Vijay.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning as well.
If you don't mind, let's talk about building a workforce for tomorrow.
Yeah.
So obviously you are very advanced in the data and healthcare side. It's in my experience, a lot of healthcare plans have very tenured staff, right? So many of them did not grow up in this era. And so how are you transition, or how would you recommend transitioning the workforce, whether upskilling, bringing on new, whatever, to adapt to this data as a service data model that is very actively talked about right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, I don't know if anybody has really come with a model that seems to work effectively say, across all industries or segments. But for us, I think the way we think about it is that, and this is one of the strategies that we are in the middle of deploying. We said, in order for us to think about the workforce transformation, we need to paint a clear picture of what's our data vision, what's our analytics vision, what's our AI vision, and how are we going across this? And in that context, what are the tools and the technologies that are going to be important? And how do we get our workforce at least exposed to that? And then on top of it, give them the skills, the training that they need to make that happen. So part of what we've done today is we've kind of talked about it in the context of a modernizing our data foundation. So we're using technologies like the cloud, the hyperscalers like AWS and Snowflake. So that's one area of upskilling we are doing, is bringing our workforce from a traditional mainframe to using these powerful technologies and giving them a hands-on experience and skill set. However, I think now that they have this skill set, the next leap will be a pretty significant leap when we talk about the world of AI and specifically Gen AI. There, I think we have to reimagine the workforce conversation. And that's not a simple dialogue about taking somebody and say, how do you become a better prompt engineer, or how do you become a better, predictive or an LLM modeler and an architect? What we're saying is, there's going to be skill sets that are critical. So, an architect and a prompt engineering are two skill sets that are going to be critical for the future. So, how are we thinking about both from an internship program, whether that's with universities that are beginning to start to do this at scale, having a robust internship model to get people in, to at least expose them to the world of healthcare and see, what we can learn from them. So that's one aspect. We're also looking at our partnerships across our vendors to say, who has a good work skill transformation program? Can we learn something from them and see how they were approaching it? And how do we bring that to our organization as well? So that's the second dimension. And last but not least, and this is the hardest thing to do, and it's a hard conversation no matter where you are, is, do we need to reimagine our functions? And that's not something that comes easy, and specifically in healthcare. So, what is my future of data and analytics? So, I can imagine a world where people don't need analysts on demand. What people need is analysts who can create the context on data so that the user gets the context that they need, but they can use an intelligent interface to get to the answer. So that reimagining of what should our function look like with the bots, with the intelligent automation, with those things, that is where we have to go. And we have, and even for me, I'm not quite there yet, but thinking about all aspects is going to be key, because you can't do this as just a skills conversation, a workforce optimization conversation, or a tooling conversation. You have to almost say, how do I do this tomorrow as a function? And then work backwards to what are the things that I value as my intellectual property? What do I need to get the context on the data right, and I understand my consumption model so that I can create a new framework? That, I think, is where most organizations will struggle, because that is not something that comes easy. Given the fact we are all legacy, specifically in healthcare, a lot of folks who's been here for a long time who know the operations quite well, but they haven't been forced to reimagine it. And that's where the difficult discussions lie.
Yeah, typically don't, they've been there long enough that they've got a few years left and they really don't want to reimagine in many cases. Some are just sponges and want to. You sort of answered my next question already, which is, your strategy around leveraging strategic partners to
Yeah.
upskill, develop that model. So I'll skip that one and just a couple of you basic ones. So my experience in healthcare in general is there are a significant amount of redundant data sets within the organization that are A, redundant, B, not as secure as they've been sitting around forever,
Right.
not accurate. So they'll get tapped for information for reporting. They're not up to date. How do you look at a strategy for cleansing those unused data sets, removing the batch jobs that create them every night, and the reports that are no longer used that sit out there as well?
So it's a great question. And I think the one thing that I would also add is that most of these data assets, legacy assets, are applications in themselves. So what happens is typically people create applications around a data asset. And over time, they support your billing function, your print labeling function. They support a variety of what I call operational systems. So rather than calling it a data warehouse or a data asset, it's now becoming an operational data store and those type of things. So what we did when we kind of did our data strategy was we identified what we thought were those high value legacy data assets that we need to retire and have a focused effort around that. So we said out of the 18 things, there's 4 of them that we need to have a strategy around. So our mainframe data warehouse, we would say, has to be retired. In order to retire it, we had to put out an edict saying no new interfaces will be built out of that. It is only in a maintenance only mode, and no architecture can use that as part of a future framework. So we put an edict saying it is pretty much a maintenance only mode. So no enhancements, no upgrades, and no new assets being built off of that. So that's one way to kind of stem the tide. The second thing we did is we created what I call data pipelining into our what I call the future state assets and said all the data that's going to feed into our legacy assets will now feed into this new asset. And this will be rationalized and will be validated for accuracy and completeness so that we can give the confidence that the same data exists in both places. So we don't have to do that in the legacy asset. The third strategy is really now to unbundle what are those applications hanging off and what's the right way to reposition them to our modern asset. And that's the place we're in today. But this is a deliberate, repeatable exercise that organizations must take on and not say, oh, it's hard, nobody will sign up, so I'm not doing it. Because specifically, healthcare systems are very bad at retiring legacy assets. It's almost like you always find one user somewhere in a remote corner who says, I still use it, and you can't turn it off. So part of this is being deliberate in that retirement strategy and making it part of what I call your operational budget. So we always say this legacy process has to be part of our operational core budget, where a dedicated dollars are there to do this continually. Because this is not going to be done in overnight. It's a 3-year roadmap, and we've got to do it as a focused effort. I hope
Yeah,
I'm
great.
answering your question. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Vijay. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I just said, I'm hoping that kind of answered your question on this. But it is a focused effort rather than an incremental effort.
Yeah, very clearly. Thank you. Yeah, I've done a number, many migrations from legacy platforms to newer ones, from different database platforms to SQL, et cetera. You're always left with, you've got 1,700 reports out there. Oh, we need them all. Typically, you just turn them all off.
Yeah.
And then when they start complaining, those are the ones you turn back on. Same way with access. You just say you have to renew everyone's access every year. They all submit the request to the manager. Manager approves every one of them. So it never really improves much. It's very challenging that way.
Absolutely.
So you also talked about earlier about AI generating sort of, we'll just call it documentation. Like, where do you see really good use cases around improving the fulfillment area, so that we're not constantly having to or print out EOB, send them out at astronomical costs, as well as do you think there will be a time when CMS, for example, would be less paper dependent and work with the payers to be more innovative?
Yeah, I think this one, again, I'm not the expert, but I always believe that technology adoption happens when I think a regulatory body says this is how we're moving forward. So I think it'll be easier to scale this if an entity like a CMS said, here's how we want to transact in the future, right? Becomes clearly a mandate that people can organize themselves around. And that also promotes what I call a transparency across the industry to say, what else can we streamline as part of this? Um, I think if it's individual health plan or individual provider, I think the question also always comes about is what's the ROI? Is there a true return on investment? Let's say I do, all EOBs through intelligent bots and so on, and somebody says I still need a paper copy to see what happened. You still have to mail them out because that's what the mandate is to have an EOB sent out. So those type of things I think would be better if there's a way that the regulatory body says or the governing body says, here is the way we want to transact. That would be my preference because then it's easier to organize around. Um, I think what we can do in terms of the member experience, as I said, like making our portals more intelligent, right? A lot of our portals are all about um, you know presenting information that's on paper. How do we make that interaction a little bit more um, useful, and based on that learn from those interactions and build the right intelligent automation into those what I call modalities would be important. So I think we have to learn through that and say what's the best way to interact, because not all members are the same. Some like still getting a paper, some like text messaging, some don't. So there's a little bit different ways people want to interact. And so that's what's going to make it harder to do if it's a health plan initiative in terms of innovation. It's easier if it's a mandate. That's always in healthcare, that's worked well.
Yeah. So last question, Vijay. So if what would you like to see within your area, data analytics AI, in the next 12 months be done across the industry, whether it's just the association or payers in general, that you would think would really advance quality of care?
I think in my simple estimation, I think we have to continue to build on what we're doing, but I would say reduce the timelines by which we achieve our outcomes. A lot of things in healthcare takes a long time for whatever reason, whether call it privacy, call it security, call it mandate, regulations that are unique by each state, in the US. So there's a lot of different perspectives that people have, but we haven't reduced what I call the innovation cycle. It takes years to do something in healthcare rather than weeks and months. If there's one desire I have is how do we shrink what I call the innovation cycles so you can get to those answers, test it out in the marketplace, see what works, what doesn't, and kind of iterate, right? So there's not going to be a simple way to do it unless your framework says, I'm going to iterate fast and furiously. That's one thing I'm hoping. And I think that requires a strong data foundation. So organizations must be prepared to make sure that their data is robust. And then their sprint cycles to get to those outcomes are faster. So my hope is that we all adopt what I call an agile mindset across healthcare continuum and say we're all going to operate in an agile way. Because in healthcare, not one entity can solve it all, right? It's a handshakes across many. And so for if all of us work at different pace, and for all of our own what I call internally insular problems, we are never solving it on behalf of the member or the patient.
Awesome. Vijay, I really appreciate your time. This has been enlightening for me. It's been a pleasure meeting you. It's great to hear your thoughts on the industry, especially around data and analytics. And again, I appreciate your time and I appreciate you joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Thank you very much, Ron. Enjoyed the conversation as well.
Thank you, sir.